Well, hey everybody, we are so glad that you're here for our final installment of our series, Red Flags, Respect, and Relationships, where we've been talking about really all things connected to sex, dating, relationships. And yes, we have been exploring those things here at the church. We've been talking about sex and relationships and dating and all the complicated stuff that comes with it. Through this series, we've specifically looked at the items like red flags that we want to notice and red flags that we want to avoid. We've talked about respect that we want to give and receive from others. And we've also talked about the relationships that we have with people who care about us and who support us. And you may say, well, why are you talking about that in the church? Well, it's because we believe that the church is one of the best places to have conversations about topics like this. It's a safe space that's filled with people who care about you, who support you, who want to help you navigate these challenging topics of sex and relationships in a way that honors God, others, and yourself. And so as we begin our time together today, I want to begin by telling you a quick story. Now, maybe for some of you, you had something as a child that carried a lot of really significant value for you. And for me, I remember, I've always been somebody who loves action movies and who really gets kind of engrossed in those things. And so as a child, I remember my brother-in-law was in the Air Force and he was stationed in England. And during his time there, we decided to take a trip over to England to see them. And while we were there, we found a particular G.I. Joe figure that we could not find anywhere in the States. And so I begged and I pleaded with my parents to buy this particular little action figure with me. It was a couple bucks. It wasn't a lot back in those days. And so they bought it for me. And I remember I took this action figure with me everywhere. I clutched it, really close. I kept it in my pocket. I had it with me at all times. Well, after we purchased it, a couple days later, we went to an air show. And I remember while we were at that air show, I lost this particular action figure and it was never found again. And I remember all the heartache and all the crushing defeat that came with it. And I carried that with me for many, many years until when the new G.I. Joe movies came out, a few years back. My parents thought it would be really funny to purchase for me the actual action figure that I had lost. Now, this is not the original. This is from the new movies, and it's actually a guy named Zartan who was a villain. I don't know why I was drawn to him, but my parents thought it would be really cool to get me this action figure as a replacement. And there were some things that, if we're honest, they really tend to matter to us a lot when we're in elementary school or grade school. But while those things had a ton of value or a ton of interest from us while we were younger, as we grow up, maybe things have changed. And one day it's like your most prized possession, it is something really valuable like a Zartan action figure, and then the next day it doesn't really matter. And just like that, it's like what you cared about a lot doesn't suddenly matter anymore because it stopped adding value to your life. Now, why is that? Well, I think it's because we usually determine that something is valuable in our lives based on what it can give us in return. Let me give you a few examples here. There are things that we believe are valuable because they're relevant to us right now, like a phone or maybe, a social media account or maybe a tablet. There are things that benefit us in some way. But what about things that don't have value? Those things really don't do a whole lot for us right now because we say, well, they're not really adding value to our lives. You could say it this way, that sometimes without realizing it, we treat people in our lives the same way. When they can do something for us or they can give something back to us, we tend to consider them as valuable or important. But what happens when they don't? Well, that's when we begin to treat them like, well, they've lost their importance. And I understand that not all of you are doing this. Or maybe some of you are doing this and you don't even realize that you're doing this. But it's important to talk about because this is a really big deal, especially when it comes to the topics that we've been looking at through this series of sex and dating. Because when we treat people that we're interested in or spending, we spend time with them how we treat them matters. And we might be tempted to talk about the people that we're attracted to in ways that really aren't adding value to them. And here's the thing, it's perfectly okay when somebody stands out or catches your attention or you find them attractive. But let's be honest, is there a line that you can cross when that happens that can become disrespectful or dishonoring to the other person? Because maybe you're tempted to talk about people you're attracted to in ways that aren't honoring to them. Maybe you say things about their bodies or their personalities that aren't respectful. And maybe you say those things to their faces. Maybe you say it behind their backs. Maybe you start to think about them in ways that really aren't valuing and honoring to them. And, those are kinds of thoughts that, we say, well, we wouldn't want them to have, or really anybody to have, or anybody to really know about. And these thoughts may be red flags. They may be signals to check in and ask ourselves, are our thoughts actually valuing the other person? Or maybe we ask the person, hey, send me some pictures or participate in behaviors that don't show them value. And maybe we treat the person we're attracted to in a way that makes us feel good, even though it may not make them feel good. We flirt with them, we tease them, we talk to them in a way that doesn't benefit anybody but ourselves. And in those situations, we're not just thinking about how it makes the other person feel, we're thinking only about ourselves. And so no matter how it happens, the truth is this right here, that when we don't treat others like they have value, we wind up treating them like objects instead of people. You see, objects maybe mean a lot to us when they first catch our feelings or when we first start talking. But objects don't seem to have the same value when they don't give us what we want. Because deep down, we all want to be valued. We want respect in a relationship, and not getting it feels like a red flag. And if this is what we want for ourselves, then shouldn't it also be what we want for other people? In other words, shouldn't we treat others with value? Shouldn't we treat others with value? Now, I think it's important to stop here and remind us of this simple truth, that God made each of us. And because of that, we're all valuable. God made each of us, and because of that, we're all valuable. That fact should be the starting point for how we treat other people and how we treat ourselves. But we shouldn't just stop there, because believing that we deserve value because of God is one thing, but treating people that way is another. Now, thankfully, Jesus gives us a very clear picture of how to treat people like they have value. And that's where we're going to look today. Because about 2,000 years ago, Jesus was having a conversation with some really smart people. Now, these were religious leaders and lawyers who really disliked Jesus. Now, these guys thought, hey, we're the ones that are in charge of the ancient Jewish people. People are supposed to listen to us. People are supposed to follow our rules. And people are supposed to obey the laws of God the way that we do. But then Jesus comes along and he starts teaching something entirely different. Because Jesus obeyed all of God's laws, but he did so in a way that exemplified love. And the religious leaders, they weren't fans of it. In fact, they would often confront Jesus and they would try to get him to say something that they knew would go against God just to prove that he wasn't somebody worth trusting. And in the encounter that we're going to look at today, there's a group of religious leaders who approach Jesus kind of to debate with him, basically. To debate, to question, and to try to catch him saying the wrong thing. And finally, one of them basically just speaks up and he says, okay, Jesus, what's the most important commandment that God has for all of us? And in Mark 12, we see that Jesus answers in a way that they didn't expect, because here's what he says. He says, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. The second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these. You see, Jesus gives such an incredible answer here, because what actually matters most to God, Jesus is saying, hey, it's real simple. It's love God with all that you are and treat other people the way you want to be treated. That's what it's all about. But when Jesus uses the word neighbor here, it's important to note he's not talking about your literal next door neighbor. He's actually referring to somebody else who's around you. Literally, it could be referring to every other person who's around you. And you could say it this way, because God cares about how we value ourselves and others. God cares about how we value ourselves and others. So if we want to follow God's greatest commandments that he gave us here, we have to start with value for everybody, including ourselves. And this is a really big deal when it comes to the topic of relationships, especially when we look at the topics of sex and dating. Because if we want to avoid becoming a walking red flag, then we have to check the way that we think about and treat other people. We have to add value to them as people, not as objects. Because remember, you handle an object or a thing, but you love and value and respect a person. We have to show other people respect. And through this series, we've talked about that it starts by practicing sexual integrity, which is choosing to respond to the sexual things that we feel, think, and desire in a way that respects ourselves, others, and God. And in addition to respecting others, it's important that we choose to love and respect ourselves, because we have to start by treating ourselves like we have the value that God says that we do. And we need to expect other people to treat us with the respect that we deserve. Why? Because God cares about how we value ourselves and others. So what does that look like when you go back to school, or when you're joking with your friends, or scrolling through social media, or when you're alone with your crush or your significant other? What happens when you're tempted to make jokes or participate in behaviors or treat somebody in a way that, isn't honoring to them, but only gets you what you want in return? You could say it this way to kind of summarize all of that. What can we do to treat ourselves and others with value and respect? Well, here are 3 questions that I think we can ask. And again, these tie into the theme for the series of red flags, respect, and relationships. So first, when it comes to red flags, you could ask yourself this question. Do you believe that we all have value to God, others, and ourselves? So before we can treat other people like they have value, we need to first believe that they need to be treated, or they deserve to be treated well. Because if you don't respect yourself and your body, it's going to be hard for you to value other people, or to know what it means to be valued by other people. So here's a great test. What do you think about when you look in the mirror? Are your words and actions and thoughts, are those showing you any red flags about the way that you value yourself? And then take it a step further and think about how that affects how you treat other people. Think about how that comes across to other people. Are your words, behaviors, and thoughts a red flag for how you see the person that you're attracted to? So do you believe that we all have value to God, others, and ourselves? Then as we look at the topic of respect, what would it look like to treat yourself and others in a way that honors God? Consider what it might look like if you made a change, both in the way you respect yourself and in the way you respect other people. Maybe you ask somebody, hey, stop talking to me the way that you're talking to me. Or maybe you block the people on social media that ask you for pictures that you know are inappropriate. Or maybe you end a relationship that doesn't respect your boundaries. Those things aren't being rude or unkind. Those things are about respecting yourself. And then you can do the same for somebody else. Because maybe you stop making the jokes about somebody else's body. Or maybe you stop leading somebody on by flirting for their attention, or pressuring them to do something that they aren't ready or willing to do. Whatever it is that might be the thing for you, find ways to treat other people in ways that honor God every day. Because what would it look like to treat yourself and others in a way that honors God? And then third, looking at the topic of relationships. Who can you talk to for help? Maybe some of you aren't sure what it looks like to value yourself and others. And so maybe you need to find a trusted adult to talk to kind of help you navigate what this means for you. For others of you, maybe you're struggling and you feel like, well, I don't have any value because of the way that somebody else treated me. Maybe you had boundaries crossed or things that happened to you that you didn't approve of. And because of all that, you're struggling to see how anybody could have value, especially yourself. And if that's you, please know this. You have value. You have value. What happened to you or the choices that you've made, they don't take that away. And my prayer today is that you would take a brave step to talk to an adult that you trust. Maybe it's a parent or a family member, a coach, a teacher, a counselor. Maybe it's a small group leader if you meet here with us in person, to have a conversation about this very thing. Because these are people who love you, who value you, who want to help you find the help that you deserve. Because remember, God cares about how we value ourselves and others. When we learn to love and value and respect ourselves, we'll be able to do the same for other people. When we meet here in person, that's why we have small groups, because they're a great place to start practicing this. And so as we wrap up this series today, we want you to think about the way that you can add value to other people. Maybe you listen to them, or you encourage them, or you keep, the circle safe by, letting them share and helping them grow in their ability to value other people as you do the same. And so as we wrap this up today, I want you to think about this particular question here that you see next to me. What's one way you can value someone else? What's one way you can value someone else?